Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. The demonetization drive continues to cast a shadow on the deliberations of the GST Council to implement the goods and services tax. At the end of the 8th GST Council meeting, the centre and the states are nowhere near a consensus on dual control or compensation. Several state finance ministers said that even a June or July deadline for rolling out GST looks impossible with the number of issues that remain unresolved. States led by West Bengal are now demanding 100% compensation for revenue losses once GST is implemented. Though the issue of compensation was already discussed and agreed upon in earlier meetings, the demonetization initiative has reportedly spurred the states to demand changes in the law, including bi-monthly payment of compensation instead of quarterly. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a look at where the GST stands right now and what are the roadblocks. Joining me on the program today are Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry; Mohan, Guruswamy, Senior Economist; Praveen, Professor, Center for Economic Studies, JNU. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program. Mr. Dua, I'd like to start with you, of course. You know, since the GST Council was formed, several headways were made and, several sticking points were agreed upon. But after demonetization, it seems like some of the agreed upon points have now suddenly become contentious issues.
You're absolutely right about that. Till the 8th of November, the general impression was that the meetings of the GST Council, general perception was that it was cooperation, cooperatives, federalism at work, etc. Because a large number of issues, and those are substantive issues, progress had been made, and one of these was on the rates. Second, there also consensus also seemed to be emerging on what items would be allowed to be exempted, what would be covered, and also on the most contentious issue, which has now come to the fore in the last two meetings, that the centre, whether the centre can really levy cesses over and above the rates. Since the demonetization drive started, there has been certainly polarization within, if I might use the word, within the GST Council. We find Bengal, Kerala and Delhi clearly aligned against letting the GST progress substantially. And when I say progress, that be able to meet the deadline of 1st of April. And the issues which are, actually coming to the forefront and holding up are substantive issues. Not that all substantive issues had been handled, though these are operational as well. One of these is jurisdiction and control over the assessees. Second is with respect to rates and cesses, which really goes into the compensation issue. And the third are smaller issues like registration, whether it should be central registration or registration in each state. I think the outcome of these is critical to meet the deadline, and which many states, and including some hints by the chair of the GST Council, are coming out that maybe by the 1st of April, we would not be able to roll out the GST.
I think that deadline has been completely ruled out. I think
well, nobody is admitting it, but other than the opposition states. But it looks, if you want, one takes a realistic view of things, that with the legislations required to be 3 legislations to be passed by the central parliament, even if they turn it into a money bill, it does not give, gives the Rajya Sabha much of a role.
Questions are being raised as to whether the September deadline, the constitutional bar ends then, whether that deadline will be met or not as well. We'll get to that part of the discussion in just a bit. But before that, Professor, Mr. Dua raised a point about cooperative federalism, and we've seen that happen right up until November 8th. But now it seems like the spirit is lacking somewhere after demonetization.
Yeah, 2 issues. One, of course, after demonetization, this became very messy, and the states are obviously feeling very, very unhappy about the loss of revenues because of compression of economic activities, and as a result of that, lots of issues have come up. That's one of the issues. But in any case, I mean, there are 2 issues. One, yes, many states were already on the board and saying that, okay, we should move ahead, etc. In the first place, was it a case of cooperative federalism, strengthening that, promoting that, or was it really constraining that? Was it really kind of, making it weaker? I would like to argue, and my sense is, so would Mr. Dua and so would Mr. Guruswamy, that in many ways, the powers of the state, particularly on what they can do with their fiscal policies, their ability to design a whole range of taxation and expenditure policies, etc., were obviously constrained, will be constrained by GST, right? So that itself is a serious question, whether this was in the direction of promoting cooperative federalism, or is it something which is snatching the space from the center, space by the center from the states and so on.
Yes.
So that is one issue. Having said that, it is obviously an issue that after demonetization, there is this great deal of unhappiness and contestation on almost every issue now. It is with respect to the design, and as Mr. Dua pointed out, with respect to administrative control, the voices have become shriller. In terms of tax rates, again, you hear all kinds of things. Very new issue has come up, that what happens in the waters, the center's
yes,
control of
ICs.
yeah, exactly. So, IGST and how that handles that and so on. Almost all the coastal states are up in arms. So you can see that a number of new issues are also coming up into the debate.
It's not just the old issues, but even new issues are coming up.
Yes, and creating a lot of difficulty with, what you called cooperative federalism.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
Yes.
Mr. Guruswamy, talking about revenue loss, the states like Kerala and several of the other bigger states and the important states have said that this whole exercise of demonetization will cause a loss of about 90,000 crore rupees to some of these states, to all these states, and not 55,000 crore rupees as was just decided earlier. So where is this additional money really going to come in from? Is the government going to increase the cess? What's going to happen?
As Praveen comes from JNU, in JNU they would have said the objective and material conditions have changed now.
Yeah.
They've completely changed. Now, the amount of revenues going to come in are going to take a hit. So the states will suffer from it. And the option of states to raise more revenues, either by increasing local taxation, is gone with this. So states are naturally concerned about this. And the political conditions have changed. One of the biggest opponents of GST, Jayalalitha, is dead.
Yes.
And West Bengal is now in the front line against it. And there are many other states who are going to come in now. UP might have a change in government, or may not have a change in government. There are other states also who have new governments, or may not have new government. But everything is up in the air now. So I can't see April being met. I can't even see September being met. I can see, new negotiations, new discussions on sharing. They'll want everything airtight, watertight.
If September is not met, what happens to the constitutional bar?
We'll have to go over it again. We waited for 8 years or 6 years, and, country will wait again. So, the question of the desirability of the GST, which was hammered together with great, amount of political capital being used, is now gone. So again, you'll have to work.
Indeed. Let me bring in Rajesh Mahapatra, Executive Editor of the Hindustan Times, into the picture as well. Rajesh, thank you so much for joining us. Several questions have been asked and several questions we've tried to answer over the last 5 minutes or so. One of them, of course, is the fact that, the constitutional bar itself. Now, what happens if the GST is not implemented by September? And also, let's not forget that, one disruption has already taken place in the form of demonetization in November. Can the economy take another disruption like a GST coming into force in a span of less than 12 months?
But I think, let me take your first question. What happens if you don't get it done by September? We are back to square one and we start all over again. To take the other question is that what if GST doesn't happen and another round of disruptions set in? Let me sort of say that, how the opportunity to get this reform going, that the space for that change has kept shrinking. Demonetization made it worse, but I think what has happened in the course of demonetization in terms of the political discourse, that has further shrunk that space. And if you today are saying that West Bengal, which is where it all began, let us not forget the first chairperson of the committee that was set up in this direction was the former finance minister of West Bengal, Asim Dasgupta, was the person who initiated it, all of it. And today you have the biggest resistance that is coming from West Bengal. And that resistance would only keep growing if you have things like what happened yesterday. Now, I'm not going into the right or wrong of it. I'm but the optics of it, the politics of it, is that you are not going to, the resistance that you had seen from parties like Trinamool are only going to get bigger and bigger. The other aspect is whenever you push through, see, going for reforms, when you are in a difficult economic situation, is always going to be painful. Some reform measures, it becomes very easy to push through them, and especially when they relate to tax reforms, which is always, a question of, is it a win-lose, win for some, lose for some? Is it a win-win for all, or is it a lose-lose for all? Now, the scenario that you are in, there is no win-win proposition now. Okay, the economy is slowing down. You talked about there was a time when people feared 55,000 crore of revenue loss. Today, they fear 90,000 crore of revenue loss, as Mr. Guruswamy pointed out. Look, if your economy is on a downhill journey, your revenues are going to take a hit. And when revenues take a hit, the suspicion that states have, those get strengthened. And the resistance is only going to grow stronger. So you talked about cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism has to manifest not just in terms of the economic rules that you frame. Cooperative federalism has to manifest in the way you carry out your day-to-day politics. In a nation state that we are in, it is very important that the commitment to cooperative federalism is demonstrated through your action. And increasingly, we are seeing, we hope that 2017 would be different. But we are seeing very little indication, and given that with the new regime that is in place, that the entire country has been put into a perennial election mode, I doubt if you would actually see that spirit of cooperative federalism that you expect to play out if you want to really push through such complex and
I'm going to take the point that Rajesh Mahapatra is making. I'm going to take that forward. Now, Mr. Dua, since 2014, you've seen that the central government has had several confrontations with many of the states all across the country. So is this payback time from some of those states?
Confrontations in the field of economic legislation. If you would recall, it all started with Land Acquisition Act to be amended. An act which hadn't been given much time to be operational. On 1st January 2014, it had been brought in, and within 6 months, there were demands saying that it be revisited, and that probably was a consequence, I would say, of what had happened in the general elections. The opposition got together and saying, if they gave them an opportunity. Thereafter, the centre had to virtually put on the back burner the labour legislations, the rationalization of laws, labour, etc., the jurisdiction of centre and states now. And I would say that passing of the constitutional amendment, almost by, say, unanimously, was an act which the states had started showing faith in the centre, and the centre probably had assured them of things like 100% compensation at that very point of time, and saying that it will be a fair deal when it comes to administering the GST. And now I think the centre is not balking away, if I could just point that out, from 100% compensation, because that's now cast in stone.
Yes.
In the constitutional amendment. What has happened is yesterday's observation of Dr. Amit Mitra, that look, it's no longer going to be 14% increase in excise duties, which had been anticipated, but Bengal he gave the example of Bengal, it showed 11% increase till October, and thereafter a 2% increase. So the remaining, whereas the centre is obliged to give up to 14%, not up to, estimating an projection increase by 14% on the base.
Yes.
So that's not going to happen. Consequently, he said that it's no longer 5 states which will need to be compensated. Earlier, 55,000 crores was required for only 5 or 6 states which are not expected to have a 14% increase in revenue, excise duties. That it could be 11 or 12 states, and that amount could be 90,000 or 1 lakh, 1 lakh crore rupees.
Yes.
It could be much more. We don't know as of now. It could be less, it could be more. But the centre is committed to that. So the centre is now trying to find ways and means of where to raise the revenue, and the states are saying, and very rightly I would say, saying that please find that revenue from your sources,
Indeed.
not from cesses. Because the moment you say we will levy more cesses, now you could have a GST cess. You had a Swachh Bharat tax, you had a cess for other Krishi cess. Now that could be a GST cess. Then the opportunity to increase the GST rates comes down because you are taking away the amount by cesses. So that we don't like. And the centre is now in a kind of a dilemma how to go about it.
Indeed.
And more important one is, and that's a point which my colleagues on the panel have already raised, as well as Mr. Mahapatra, is the states, you see, the powers of the state governments to levy taxation in indirect taxes was perhaps a very important power which they had. Because direct taxes, as we all know, are levied by the federal government.
Yes.
And then we share them according to the usual formula. These states, it required a large, I would use the word sacrifice almost, on their part to agree to have the central government through the GST Council, which is, I wouldn't say central government, it's the combination of the two, to centralizing that power in the GST Council rather than each state legislature and the MLAs and the ministers who constitute that. So that was, when they agreed, it was, they were taking a political risk. And if they find now that thereafter there has been a lack of fulfillment of obligation or fulfillment of that so-called, I use the word cooperative federalism deliberately in that sense, saying the centre was willing to go along with us when we are sacrificing so much, and if the centre is not being considerate to us, considerate in the political sense.
Right.
That if they are going to go around their own way of sort of ensconcing them or trying to win more seats, etc., political capital, then we are not with you.
Indeed, indeed. Mr. Guruswamy, Professor Jha raised an important point about how new issues have cropped up now, since the latest developments from November 8th. Now, do you believe that, finance ministers of various states, of course, are lacking the will really to ensure that the GST goes through?
It's not a question of will. GST is a structural reform. It's changing the nature of the relationship in centre and states. The states are actually ceding some of their power to the centre. And those conditions are now gone. First of all, economically, we're on a different trajectory of growth. This demonetization, by the time we take this tally, we're going to see a 2 to 3% loss in GDP and entering a different trajectory. And whatever we've lost about 7-8 lakh crores we seem to have lost. So, where is the centre going to get money from?
Yes.
If all this compensation is required, where are they going to get the money? They don't have the money. So it's a question of everybody saying, we've all been hit together, and let's all put our heads together and work this out. But the conditions for that don't exist, because the Prime Minister has managed to antagonize everybody who's on the other side of the aisle. And they're all ganged up on him. There's so much of anger in the opposition ruled states and among the opposition that he will not get the cooperation of anybody. He can't sit. And this thing with Rahul Gandhi saying, I say, milte rahe hum, it's not going to happen. That was a one-off thing. Because they're not going to meet him again. UP elections are there, the other elections are off. So, and he took time to build up this relationship, with this huge antagonism after the election. He sobered it down, built it up, and said, let's all work together, cooperative federalism. All that is gone. He messed it up with this one single act of, I always call it an act of great stupidity. Everything was going well, he destroyed it. And, he's waged war on his rivals again, back to that old attitude. So, I don't think it's going to work.
But people have called it a political masterstroke. We leave that for later. But yeah, Professor Jha, you wanted to make a point?
Two things. One, I completely agree with what Dr. Guruswamy said, in terms of losing the political capital, and it's also connects with what Rajesh was saying in terms of other aspects of cooperative federalism and not only economic dimension. We saw what happened in 2016 in several states and the way the center behaved with them. We need not go into the details of those, whether it's Arunachal or Uttarakhand and so on and so forth. That in any case was building up after that initial gesture and sort of modalities with which some goodwill was being created and so on. So that's one issue. So clearly that is suffering quite a lot. On top of that, the current situation which has come up, largely because of demonetization. Now, revenue sources have of course shrunk precisely because growth has gone down. Over and above that, what if you saw what was being asked for in yesterday and today, that reduce taxes further? Now almost industry after industry is lining up and saying that, including our Commerce Minister who is saying
yes,
that employment intensive sectors, you have to have reduced rates, etc., because we have to compete abroad and so on. So, you have a situation which is an extremely difficult one. How are you going to think of compensation, even the 55,000 crores? Forget about the additional requirement, etc., right? And then, in the next couple of months, my sense is that there would be a lot of ill will.
Will there be any kind of consensus in the next 2 or 3 months?
Most unlikely.
Okay.
Partly because of elections and partly because of the objective situation which has come into being.
Sure. Rajesh Mahapatra, as far as looking at the present scenario and how it stands at the moment, would you say in hindsight then it is good that the GST will not meet its April 1st deadline?
No, certainly not, because even let's also let's say for a moment the intent that was there behind demonetization, if it were to succeed, it would have worked wonders if we were also making similar progress on GST front. So I'm just saying, just if I consider all the arguments that came from the government, that if the demonetization move was to be read in conjunction with GST, it would have been a great boon for economy. That is also gone. Even the government's own arguments doesn't hold. I mean, the basic rationale which was there behind GST, that still holds. So why would we say that it's a good development that it is not happening? It's an unfortunate development, because it is unfortunate because this is a reform that would have probably helped the larger economy. We are not succeeding because we are not going about...
The professor wants to counter you, then you can respond to that. You can respond to that, yeah.
Even the basic rationale is one which has been questioned a great deal. Whether it would be increasing the rate of growth and a whole lot of other substantive things. Of course, it would have created or expanded in one sense the common market. But then, is it something which, on balance, if you take all the costs and the benefits into account, including that of cooperative federalism that we were talking about earlier, was it something which is a completely win-win situation? I would certainly argue very strongly no.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, I was talking in terms of whether it creates an enabling environment. And I think the basic rationale and the intent and the principles of it together create an enabling environment. The devil lies in the details. How do you work it out? What rate you agree on? What principles of engagement you agree on? And that is where actually we are having difficulties in terms of forging consensus, and rightly so, because if the spirit of cooperative federalism has to be upheld, then you cannot go for certain things that you are asking now and which states are opposing, and rightly so, because it sort of hurts the spirit of cooperative federalism. Just I wanted to point out, when Mr. Dua was listing out, there was a third area you said that's a small area, with if you are referring to the ones where the center wants to have jurisdiction over companies that are less than 1.5 crore turnover.
No, not really. Go ahead, please.
But that's actually a big area. That's a big area of concern for states. So states have a right now to suspect the intent that you have behind this move, and that's where it breaks down. But having a unified tax system, having a simplified tax system, that does help a broader economy.
Indeed, sure. Mr. Dua, you want to respond to that?
I don't think I probably conveyed it right. I call the issue of multiple registration or single registration a smaller issue.
Oh, okay.
The,
Sorry, I got it wrong.
the issue of jurisdiction and control is a substantive one. I fully agree with you, and that's what I meant. The issue now is, if I might just spell it out, the states are saying up to a turnover of assessees turnover of 1.5 crores, we want to have sole control.
Yes.
The federal government is saying not sole control, but it will be, as far as service tax is concerned, we will come in there as well. And above 1.5 crores, we will administer. The states are saying, no, we want to be there as well.
Indeed.
And what is the logic being given by the central government? That we know how to administer the service tax, you don't have experience, so that's how we come in.
Sure.
The second point, if I could just
very quickly, because I've got time constraints.
The second one issue is with respect to interstate movement of goods. The central government says IGST, which is the law now to cover that up, that only entitles us, and that's flowing out of the constitutional amendment, which says IGST will be administered by the central government, but shared, their proceeds will be shared. States are saying, please revisit that.
Indeed.
Finally, they are saying, how do you define the state? You are saying our state means the 12 coastal states, 12 nautical miles is ours, is all that you can do, whereas a lot of bunker sales, high sea sales of petrol and fuel take place outside, revenue comes to us there. All these are, to my mind, substantial issues which the central government must take on board.
And that's what's being discussed now at the council as well. Yes, Mr. Guruswamy, final quick point from you. You want to say something?
GST required a different view of the country as one huge market, and and looking at a transition to becoming an industrial society. So making business easy across states, across borders, state borders. Now that whole vision is going because we become fragmented and fractured again. So to pick it up and come to this is going to take a lot of effort. So I can't see it happening now.
Okay, indeed. Professor Jai, your final closing comments, please.
No, my final closing point is that most likely you will not see this being adopted by June or July, and it might in fact get into serious difficulties even by September deadline.
Sure. Rajesh Mahapatra, please close the show for us with your final closing comments.
I would just concur with that. I think April 1 is a foregone conclusion. Let us hope that the good sense prevails and they manage to stick to the September deadline.
All right. On that note, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Rajesh Mahapatra, Ajay Dua, Mohan, Guruswamy and Praveen Jha, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you so much for watching.